Hi, today we're going to be talking about silent films and magic, and more specifically, kind of the history of silent films and filmmaking, which kind of got us to this point. This is the second part of an assignment that we started. If you would watch the Crash Course episodes that are listed down below first if you missed them. Otherwise, if you haven't missed them, then you are on track for this assignment. So, here we go. First, we're going to talk about the Lumeire Brothers. The Lumeire Brothers were not the first person to create film, but they were the first people to start presenting it out into a group of, to a crowd. Edison was the first person to create film, and it should be known and remembered from our previous films that, remember, Edison took credit for it, but it was one of his team members in his think tank of intelligent humans that created film, and Edison just really liked to take credit for stuff, as we know and love. So anyway, the first film that they actually presented to a group of people was the train coming into the station, which is down below here. And it is in film lore that the moment that the film started playing, that the people ran out of the theater in utter shock and fear. But now it's kind of pretty common knowledge that it wasn't actually in shock and fear. Historians believe that the people who actually went to their first showing were pretty aware of what they were going to watch. However, it was very shocking and very exciting, so they probably gasped and cheered, but they probably didn't run away in fear. After that, we had the birth of the cinema. And the first one that we had was the Nickelodeons, which, as you can see right here, this is something that Edison believed in. He did not want to really show it to a group of people. He didn't find that to be, and he didn't focus on projecting things to a stage. But that's where the Lumeire Brothers came in. And the Nickelodeon, the first one here, was just a one person can watch it, and it cost 5 cents. Hence the term Nickelodeon. Nickel, get it? Anyway, then it kind of evolved into a theater. It still only cost a nickel to get in, and so you could go and you could see a little short film, and that was how theaters started kind of becoming an American pastime. Now, a very important footnote in the history books of film are the stuntmen. Now, as film started moving away from just watching trains come into stations and people wanted some sort of story, stuntmen became a very important part of all the movie making. Now, during the Great Depression, there were a lot of people that didn't have any work, and so they'd just hang around businesses and just kind of be day laborers. So a producer or a director would go out there, and they saw these men that were desperate for jobs, and they pretty much said, hey, I'll give you $10 to do whatever we ask you to do. Who's in? And people would just sign up. And so stuntmen at first weren't very organized. They would just do whatever they were told, but then as their jobs became more intense and more like crazy, they actually got organized. And so some of the things that they get paid for, which are just fun side facts, is for example, they could jump off of at least a 60-foot, at most a 60-foot building at $1 a foot. It was $30 if you were willing to flip a stagecoach, and another $20 if you were willing to get drugged through the underbrush afterwards. It was $100 if you were willing to do a motorcycle to plane transfer, and it was $120 a week to do everything. So that was just kind of the beginning of stuntmen and kind of the beginning of storytelling, because they started creating stories of how they got in these wacky situations. Magic comes in with George Méliès. Now, George Méliès was a stage magician, and he saw the potential with film, and he actually kind of stumbled upon magic in his films on by mistake because his camera got jammed, and in that time where the camera stopped rolling, everything moved, and in that he saw like the first practical effect or in-camera process. And so he would make a ton of them. He'd have people with floating heads, and he'd make double exposures, making people have twins, and he had these great, crazy stories with these magic feats inside of him because he was a magician. And I can't quite prove it yet, but I believe like, that's what I want to believe is where the term the magic of movies came from. But like I said, I can't prove that. But you'll most recognize Méliès for this, his trip to the moon. This is a very iconic scene from all of moviedom, is the ship capsule busting into the eye of the moon. And so this is really where we're bringing the magic portion of our own film that we want to make. We want to kind of test that camera process, in-camera process, and in-editing process, because we have the magic of technology. And so we're going to be using magic in it as well to kind of pay homage to Méliès's work. Coming to the end of silent film, kind of at the end of this assignment, we'll talk about this more. The silent film age meant the end of a lot of careers of a lot of these stuntmen and people who had been in these movies. If you don't believe me, there's an entire movie that was based on it, which was Singing in the Rain. If you haven't seen Singing in the Rain, you need to do that. Anyway, they just couldn't do it. They couldn't make the transition. A great example of a real life person that didn't make the transition very well was Buster Keaton. Buster Keaton was known for having just a straight face, and the world would be falling around him, and he could just keep the most straight, deadpan expression the entire time. But after silent film kind of went away and asynchronous sound took over, being able to hear a story and hear people talk was more important than just someone staring at the camera and off into space. And so he didn't get as much work as he once did. So now let's talk about the aesthetics. Now, aesthetics of silent movies is the look, what it kind of embodies. When you think of a silent movie, what do you think of? And so in this case, genre often plays a part in film look, but there were a lot of genres within silent film, but all of that still has a similar umbrella of like the silent film look. So in your assignment, you're going to have to incorporate all of these. But I want you to kind of think about, when you think of silent movies, what goes into it. So in a little bit, I'm going to have you stop this tape, and I want you to tape. Who am I? Anyway, you're going to want to stop this YouTube video. You're going to write down as many different elements that you think would be in a silent movie. If you need some examples, if you were going to describe the scene that's happening right in front of you, what would you say were in that particular video, and what do you think would be in all the video? And so I want you to kind of write those down, and then we're going to come back and we'll see how many of them you got right. And we're back. So, first one, let's see if you got it. It's in black and white. Excellent. Obviously, they didn't have color at the time. They would paint on each frame if they wanted to have color on it, and that was a very painstakingly horrible job, but they didn't have any color. There wasn't the technology yet for color to be in it, so most silent films are in black and white. The vignette. The vignette is the black around the outside edges of the screen. You can see it very, very clearly in this one. Now it's a style choice. People just add that for fun. But back in the day, it was something they really couldn't stop. Because if you think about it, the little things were square, and the little film squares are square, and then the lens is round. And so it would come in, and they just wouldn't get as much exposure on the outside edge of the film. So that's how they would kind of get that vignette. The word pages or talkies or the dialogue screens, that's also a pretty stereotypical element of most silent films. Now, it's not in all of them, and you don't need it in yours. That's not a requirement for your own video challenge, but it is an essential part for the in the history of silent film. So if you want to have some sort of complicated storyline that can't just be done with exaggerated motion or just showing instead of telling, you might need to write in a talkie page. All right, the long shot. This is probably the most common shot of the silent film era. People use long shots a lot, and that was at first, like most of the Méliès movies were shot with a long shot, where the whole body of the actor was shown, and the whole area, the great set design was all in the view. But they didn't really come up with those nuanced film shots until later in filmmaking, as they really started telling the story, zooming into people's faces and expressions. Your actors will have to be mimes. That means that they are a little bit more crazy. They have wild expressions. They wave their arms around, over-exaggerate their emotions. This is so that you can kind of get an idea of what's going on. If you're just sitting there and you're just talking like this, it's going to be a pretty boring movie because we won't really understand what's going on. You need to like really show us. And double speed. This one's not the one that you'd think so much, but the movies back then were at a really weird pace. They were like double the speed of normal time, and so everything was happening a lot faster. In your movie, you're going to have to make it in double speed. That is one thing that is a requirement in order to give it that look. And so if your movie has to be at least 2 minutes long and you only have like 3.5 minutes of filming, you're going to find you might not have enough film in the end. So make sure that you've written a story that like you can actually fill that 2-minute requirement. Your assignment for either if you're doing it at home or if you're planning on doing it in class or with us in class, your assignment is get an idea, and I want you to map it out on MindMeister. To brainstorm. And this is just everyone on their own should have their own idea. So when you get in your group, I don't want you just to be like, what's your idea? I don't have any idea what we're doing. So then you just waste time. I want you all to bring an idea, and you can mash your ideas together. You can change your ideas. You can just talk about your ideas, but at least you have something to start the meeting with. And then when you're together tomorrow, you're going to be writing your script. We are going to start with a script lesson right at the beginning, but then the rest of the time is going to be allowed for script writing. If you're just following along at home, then you should be just writing a script. Take like 45 minutes, sit down and just write. Find out what your dialogue is going to be. Remember, that means a talkie screen. How long is it going to be? Are you going to fill that amount of time? How are you going to add that magic? There has to be magic in it. It must have the aesthetic of a silent movie, the things we just talked about. How many of those did you get right, by the way? Anyway, and then it has to be at least 2 minutes long, and it must have written script. And this whole point of it is finding that magic. How are you going to put a magic movie inside of it? So write it in your brainstorm, write it in your script, and make sure you execute it. That is a big part of this. Try and find the magic of movies. Anyway, that's the end of this silent film presentation, and I hopefully will see you soon.